Well, from non-stop news cycles, school cancellations, stock market panics, interruptions to daily routines, anxious children, constant messaging of outbreak, pandemic, empty shelves. It is enough to shake the strongest of us. So what do we do? Where do we go? It's okay. Because God has done what God always does. He has prepared a place for us. Mark already talked about how last fall, when we thought we were planning what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go, God had already guided us to design a series that would walk us to Easter, a series based and inspired upon a book about prayer, where we would look at pausing, we would look at rejoicing and asking and yield, and it seemed so great. So then this week, what happened? We questioned, should we change the message? What should we do? Because certainly in this season of upheaval and uncertainty, maybe we shouldn't be talking about rejoicing. And yet, friends, isn't that exactly, maybe even the perfect message? I am so grateful for you. I am so grateful for our family. And I will tell you that as I prepared for this message before the school cancellations, before the rodeo cancellations, before you had to wait an hour to check out at the grocery store, before we even chose to suspend our church programming and services, when I was driving to work just a few days ago, I said, Lord, what is it that you want me to say on your behalf? What is the word that you have for your people? Because there was already all these news, all these messages, and they were clouding my mind. And I heard God say, turn off the radio. Now, of course, I said, but Lord, it is praise music that I am listening to. Is this not good? And he said, turn off the radio. So I did. And as I was driving here, I was like, what's your word, Lord? What is it? I'm supposed to be preaching on rejoice. How am I supposed to preach on that this weekend with everything going on? And God so very clearly told me these 5 words: rejoice is not a response. Rejoice is not a response. Rejoice is not just a response. And as I dove into the scriptures, as I looked, I saw over and over again God telling his people, you need to praise who I am. You need to rejoice in who I am, not as a response to your circumstances, but as a requirement, as obedient children who are following me. This is the state of your worship, to rejoice in who I am. And I love, so this book I mentioned, Pete Gregg's book on how to pray, a simple guide for normal people. This was our inspiration for the series. So in this chapter, he said something that just stuck out, and I just love it. He said, prayer, or how we view God, is everything about everything. Think about that. How we view God is everything about everything. And I am so glad that you're watching here right now, but I wish you were where I am right now. I wish you were in this space, because I can look around this incredible worship space and we have these names of God surrounding us, these beautiful promises that are embedded in the name of God that says, I am Yahweh. I am the God, the provider. I am Yahweh Rapha. I am God, the healer. I am Yahweh Nisi. I am the banner. I am God, the shepherd. I am God who sees you. I am the God who is there. How we view God, how we understand who God is everything about everything. It is how we view our lives, how we view our obligations, our circumstances, our attitudes. It dictates how we pray, how we worship, how we treat others. And I love, so just a few weeks ago when it was Ash Wednesday, we had a service in this space that looked different than all of our normal services. We had stations that were set up around the room that walked us through this idea of pause and rejoice and ask and yield. And it was beautiful. At pause, we stopped. We gave you a timer. You had to be still for 60 whole seconds. And then we got to rejoice, and we had you read Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. And we asked you to take a bookmark and to start listing all the things that you could be thankful for, be grateful for. But my favorite part was this banner. You can actually see it behind me. This banner where we asked the children, we asked the adults to put their hands and to trace them. And so we have from the biggest hands, which let's just be honest, it's my husband's because he has really big hands, and the tiniest little hands, little Abram, little Bailey. I loved seeing the little hands. I loved seeing the children just put their hands out and stretch it out and trace around it. It just reminded me of how, as a parent, when my kids were little, how they would come up to me, and I knew when they came up and they stretched out their little hands to me and they stretched out their arms, I knew exactly what they needed. It was their way of telling me, Mom, pick me up. Can you hold me? And of course I did, because I wanted my child to feel loved. I wanted my child to feel safe. And I just think, gosh, that's our God. That's our God, the healer. God who sees me. God who is there. A father who, unlike me, never tires of seeing his children raise their little hands up and say, pick me up, Lord. Pick me up, Dad. I need to feel safe. I need to know that I'm loved. Isn't it so good? So as I was looking at this idea and seeing these hands and just having these images of arms outstretched, I thought of the story in Exodus 17 where Moses and the Israelites are looking at the battle before them. And Moses sends out Joshua to go fight the battles, and he tells him, it's okay, I'm going to be with you because I'm going to go up on a hill and I'm going to do something that's going to guarantee that we win. And so let's read. I'm going to read this for you. It's Exodus 17, starting in verse 10. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. And as long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. And so when Moses' hands grew tired, they took a stone and they put it under him and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur, they held up his hands, one on either side, so that his hands remained steady until sunset. And so Joshua overcame the Amalekite army with the sword. I mean, that's a great plan, right? That seems so easy. Gosh, all I have to do is raise my hand and I can have victory over my enemy. And it worked. They did. And at the end of it, they built an altar and named it Yahweh Nissi. The Lord is a banner over me. Isn't it interesting, though, that they didn't raise their hands in celebration after the battle was won? They raised their hands when they were in the middle of the battle because they knew that God was at work at that time, that God would have victory. So they raised their hands for who God is, who they knew God would be always. Before the victory, they celebrated. Hands in the air. I love it. But Moses was human. His arms got tired. He had to lower them, and he had to have friends come beside him and help him keep his hands in the air. Isn't this beautiful, this idea that their image of rejoicing, their hands in the air, was not a response to God, what God had done, but what God was doing, what God would do. Their rejoice was not a response, it was an act of faith. It was obedience. And see, God knew. He knows us so well. He knew that we needed to have this rejoicing in our lives. And so he actually wrote it into the very fabric of the lives of his people. In Leviticus 23:40, he wrote, "You shall rejoice before the Lord God." He tells them, gosh, this is what I want you to do on the first day of this festival. I want you to go get branches from trees and palms and willows and rejoice before the Lord your God. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think about rejoicing, I don't usually think about gathering sticks. That's not really my form of rejoicing. But isn't it interesting that we all kind of have different ways that we rejoice, that we celebrate? And, if you know me, if you've known me for any length of time at all, you know I'm a good Aggie. Okay, I'm a good Aggie. And that means that my form of rejoicing is I'm going to say, whoop. Oh, some of you did it right now, didn't you? I know you did, actually. I'll give a gig-em. I'll do a little, whoop. And that's how I celebrate. And it's like, but you look, football players, when they score the touchdown, they'll have a little dance, they'll have a little sign. Golfers, when they get the ball into that final 18th hole, they'll have a sign. We all have these different ways of celebrating, of showing that we want to rejoice. But so often it has some aspect of our body, our hands, some sign or language. And we do this in worship too. We have these different forms of worship. We all worship differently. Some of us will raise our hands. Some of us will sway. Some of us have a different posture of prayer. For me, my expression of worship has changed over the years. But I had a really significant change in my expression of worship some years ago, right after my first husband passed away. I just came to this point in my life where I really understood, maybe for the first time, that we aren't promised tomorrow. And so I wanted to make sure that I was living every day, that I wasn't leaving anything on the table. And so I thought, well, if I want to do something, I'm just going to do it. And I've always loved languages, especially sign language. I always thought sign language is so amazing. I thought, you know what? I'm going to learn it. So I signed up for a couple of classes. I learned sign language, and then the church that I was part of at the time began a sign language choir. It wasn't for the purpose of translating, it was for the purpose of expressing worship in a new way, in a way that used all of our bodies. And I loved it because if you have ever sat near me during a worship service, you know singing, not my gift. Not my gift, but that's okay because what I learned is I may not be able to hit a high note with my voice, but boy howdy, I can hit a high note with my hands. I can praise hallelujah to the highest. It's my form of worship. They may not be your form of worship. That's okay, but isn't it great? When we have something to celebrate, we have a way that we can use our bodies, we can use our voices to express rejoicing. But what happens when we don't feel like it? What happens when in our life it just doesn't even seem like we have something to rejoice about? Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you're sitting in your living room and you just don't feel like rejoicing. Maybe you had plans that got canceled. Maybe you have things in your life that are just now out of your control and that are bothering you. You have family that you can't see. Maybe you're frustrated because you spent money on something that now is lost, that your job is in jeopardy because no one knows what's going to happen to the economy. Maybe you are sitting there with so many reasons to not rejoice. But rejoice is not a response. Rejoice is not just a response. We prayed the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We prayed, God, Creator God, the one who created heaven and earth. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord that I know. The Lord is my shepherd. The Lord is my king. Lord is my provider. The Lord is my healer. Have you ever just been sitting there going, I know it, Lord, but I don't feel it, and I don't know how to pray, and I don't know how to rejoice when I don't feel it? I've been there. Probably more times than I would ever like to. I will be there again. I know it. But someone once shared an illustration with me that has helped a lot. He said, prayer is like a train. You know, a train has an engine, and this engine is what drives it. This engine is what tells it where to go and how to go. But guess what? Your feelings, they're not the engine. Your feelings are the caboose. Your engine is your faith, is your act of obedience. The engine is, who do you know God to be? What do you believe in? What is your faith? That is the engine, and the feelings will eventually come along. So if we are obedient in our walk, if we will pray, if we will listen, if we will just sit in God's presence, if we will let our obedience and our faith be the driving force of our life, the feelings will come. So when we raise our hands in worship, it's not because everything is great. It is because we know who God is, and we believe, and we want to worship the Lord. We want to rejoice before Him. We want to give a sacrifice of thanksgiving. There's a Hebrew word called todah. We actually studied it a couple of years ago, if you were with us during our Holy Roar series. And we looked at this Hebrew word that's a form of praise, not for what God has done, but it is a form of praise of what God will do. It is this sense of expectation that we will sacrifice our praise for God. Psalm 107, let them sacrifice thank offerings and tell of His works with songs of joy. That is Zavak Todah, a sacrifice of thanksgiving. We give praise for a God who is working in the midst of our circumstances because we know what He has done. We believe He is working now in where we are, and we know that He will do it again. So we are rejoicing, not out of a response to our circumstances. It sounds good. Yeah, in theory, Susan, that sounds awesome. But get practical with me for a moment. How do we do that? Well, I'll tell you how. It's by reframing our thinking. So rejoice is really just a reframing of our life, reframing of what we're thinking. Let me share with you a letter from the Apostle Paul. It's Philippians 4, where he tells us to rejoice always. But I want you to remember this context. Paul is not writing this because he is sitting on a beach on vacation and everything is great and he wants to tell the people like, holla, this is how you rejoice because everything is awesome. No, Paul is sitting in a jail where he has to rely on someone else to bring him food if he wants to eat. He has no idea if he's getting out. He doesn't have a lawyer working on his behalf. He may sit there until he dies. And yet he writes a letter where he says, rejoice always. Again, I say rejoice. If we want to look at it, if you have your Bibles, and I sure hope you do, Philippians 4, I want to read a couple of verses for you. He says, therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I plead with you, Euodia, I plead with you, Syntyche, to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my coworkers whose names are in the book of life. He says, gosh, guys, I love you. Man, I long for you. I want to encourage you. You're awesome. Stay strong. And then he calls out two women, but it's not what you think. He calls out these two women because they are co-workers, because they have the same purpose as Paul, which is to share the gospel, which is to work for the gospel. And something has happened in their life. Some circumstances have come that have caused either a disagreement or perhaps a distraction from what they're supposed to be doing. And so Paul says, hey guys, do not lose focus. Remember what our purpose is. Remember what we are doing. And you know what? If you can't do it, I'm going to remind all of those who are around you, go help them. Help them. Put your arm around one on either side. Lift them up. We have work to do, y'all. We have a purpose that we have to go. We have to spread this good news to as many people as possible. I want you to reframe your thinking. And he points back to what he says in chapter 2, where he says, have the same mindset as Christ. What you think should be the same as Christ. So if it's not, then you need to reframe your thinking so that we can have a job to do and we can do it well. That's what he tells you. And then he says, okay, now that you've reframed your thinking, now that you have your mind where it's supposed to be, this is what you're supposed to do. Rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Now I'm going to say it again. Rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident. Oh, the Lord, he's near. Don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your mind in Christ Jesus. Verse 4, Paul is clear. He says, listen, this is what makes us distinctive. It is our joy. The joy of the Lord. This is what makes us different than the world. Now, I want to ask you a question. Do you know that people judge you by your face? Do you understand what I'm saying? Have you ever walked in the hallways of the church or walked down and you look around and you think, is there joy in their heart for the Lord? Because they're scowling, they're grumpy. No, we need to have joy. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time and, skip around. But as Christians, as followers of Christ, we have joy because we have the grace of the Lord within us. So you have to think, okay, the joy of the Lord is in my heart. I have something that makes me different than the world. So because you have joy, verse 5, let your gentleness be evident to all. So if joy is the cornerstone of who we are, then our gentleness is the evidence. The world knows us by our gentleness, by the way we speak to each other, by the way we act towards each other, by what we post, by what we share. And then Paul says, don't be anxious. Present your request. Now, I promise you, next week we are going to have much to say about how to ask and what to ask for. But then right on the tail end, in verse 7, Paul says, here's the reward. If you do what I'm telling you, here's the reward. It is the peace of God that's going to guard your heart and your mind. So we are faithful. We are faithful to rejoice in who God is. They're going to see it on our face. They're going to see it as evidenced by how we act. And you know what? We're going to do it even if we don't feel like it, because the feelings are going to come. If you read the Psalms, man, you see lamenting. You see someone whose circumstances are not always great. You see someone who is struggling with what is going on, but you also read over and over again that we need to rejoice. Psalm 141. I call to you, Lord. Come quickly to me. Hear me when I call you. And then he says, may my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. Sacrifice. What does a sacrifice look like to you right now where you are? Okay, I'm just going to be super honest with you right now because I don't have to really look at your faces, so it's okay. I'll tell you what my sacrifice is. The last few days, it has been not rolling my eyes and sighing really loudly. Because I have had a lot of that. I will tell you, as the news of the coronavirus and all that that entailed, it escalated, I will tell you, I was a little judgmental. It was in my heart, it was quiet, but I was rolling my eyes, I was sighing loudly, and it was bad. Because I'm not an alarmist, I'm not a nervous Nelly, don't freak out about things, I'm not super emotional. But truthfully, man, I was rolling my eyes. But I will tell you this too, that the Lord reframed my thinking. He shifted my spirit these last 48 hours. I'm still not nervous, I'm still not panicked. Might even be even more calm than I was before. But on Friday, I had the ability to sit on a conference call with a whole lot of Methodist pastors. And we got to hear from experts at Houston Methodist, the CEO, their infectious disease expert. And over again, they were just calmly laying out the facts, calmly asking us, this is what we can do to sacrifice what we know is our norm in order to get ahead and to squash the spread of this virus. So it's not about my feelings. It's not about my convenience, not about my circumstances. God's like, are you willing to trust the people that I have put in place right now? Are you willing to trust that I am still your king, that I am still your shepherd, that I am still your, the one who's going to heal you? Then I need you to sacrifice. Give me a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and that's in your attitude, and that's in your thinking, that's in your actions. So some of my sacrifice is my comfort level, right? What I'm used to, my attitude, the way I present my face and my actions and what I say. I'm choosing to rejoice because I know who God is. I believe He's at work. So rejoice for God. Rejoice is not a response. It's who God is. And I'll tell you right now, I'm so grateful. I'm grateful for you. Wherever you are, I am grateful for my church family. I'm grateful that right now my family is not ill, but I also believe that if someone does become ill, I will still rejoice in who God is. And I know He is faithful. So I want us to do something together, guys. You're going to have to trust me. Do you trust me? Okay, wherever you are, I want you to stand up. Can you stand up for me? Because I got my people here. They're standing. Okay, this is what I want us to do together. Are you ready? I want you to raise your hands. Raise them up. You know you always wanted to do this in worship. Come on, but you were too afraid. We're going to do it. I don't care. There are probably just a couple people around you. They're doing it too. We all look weird. Okay, so how does this feel? How does it feel? Does it feel like great? Does it feel liberating? Does it feel weird? Awkward? Is this a sacrifice of your dignity? Is this a sacrifice for you? Maybe it should be. Maybe that's okay. Maybe God is just giving us a chance to remember that rejoicing doesn't always feel good. It doesn't always feel natural, but this is what He's asking for. He's asking us to rejoice in Him, to believe in who He is, that He is at work right now. What He has done before, He is doing now, and He will continue to do. So maybe what you and I need to do is to choose to rejoice. Not as a response to our circumstances, but because of who the Lord is.